Employers of Reddit. What is one thing someone has said or done in an interview that made you want to hire them on the spot? I never hire on the spot, as I always give some thought to the decision even when I'm very positive about someone. However, I usually give screening tests to candidates. I had one young, inexperienced candidate that did not even pass the first screening question, but afterwards asked me to show him the correct answer, and said something along the lines of "Thanks for showing me that, I have a lot to learn." I asked if he wanted some pointers and ended up lending him a book on the subject. A few days later I decided that that's the attitude I'd like to hire and gave him the green light. Did not regret. Thanks for showing me that, I have a lot to learn. Filing that one away. I once applied for a job at a Walden Books. I asked for an application and the manager asked me if I knew the alphabet. I laughed at the question, but after she kept staring at me I rattled it off, and she hired me on the spot. Turns out the last couple of hires were basically illiterate. Having been a manager at Walden Books, I can tell you that this was a major issue. I can't tell you the number of times I had to go reshelf books because someone didn't know their alphabet. I caught one employee shelving the books by color, and when I questioned her about it, I was told that it looks prettier and, besides, nobody really uses the alphabet anymore. One of my hiring questions is, tell me about a time you made a mistake doing a job. Tell me what happened and what you learned from it. One girl said, well, this story is kind of gross and might not be what you want, but it's what comes to mind right away. Then she told me about a time during her medical internship at a local hospital where she tried to prove herself to a skeptical doctor by taking a large dead body down to the morgue by herself. Even though she had never gone down before and was supposed to take someone else with her. She was a tiny girl, but in good shape, and apparently when she got down there she was supposed to move the body from the gurney to a slab, which is why she was supposed to go down with another person. She tried to move it on her own, but failed to lock the wheels on the gurney first and ended up on the floor, pinned under a large dead body for over 15 minutes before anyone found her. She said that from that she learned to follow procedures and to not be too cocky to ask for help when she needed it. I didn't see how I could not hire her after that story, because it was so genuine and atypical from the usual answers I heard for that question. They're like children. Big, dead children. Not an employer. I was eating at a Denny's with a friend one morning after some heavy drinking. While waiting for our food to come out, a guy had come in and asked the girl at the host stand if they were hiring. She handed him an application and he sat down at the table beside us to fill it out. He then asked to speak with the manager. The manager came out and spoke with him briefly and said they would contact him in the near future if I had any openings. He thanks the manager for his time and casually walks over and grabs a broom that was left propped on the wall and starts sweeping without a word. The manager turns around and asks him what he's doing and the guy responds like a badass with "I've got nowhere to be and I really need a job." Manager grabs him an apron and hires him on the spot. I was freaking impressed. That takes guts. Real guts. I was interviewing people for a seasonal outside job, and I was doing the interviewing inside the marketing depot in an available office. This young kid with long hair, a spiked dog collar, upside down crosses for earrings and a trench coat was my next interview, and as we were walking to the office I was using, I noticed several marketing staff whispering and staring with shocked expressions at this kid. He walked with confidence and waited for me to sit down before he did. He was very polite and made excellent eye contact and gave me the best interview of the day. When I explained that since this was a position dealing with the public and children and told him the earrings and dog collar would have to go, should he be hired? Without hesitation he removed them and gave me this charming grin, and I hired him on the spot and told him he was the most genuine person I had interviewed so far. He turned out to be one of my best employees and was hired full time and stayed with me for 5 years. We had a foreign guy apply with the name Mausheg. Got him in for an interview and here's what follows. Employer: how exactly is Mausheg pronounced? Mausheg. I tell you that. You have any mics that work for you? Employer: number. Mausheg. Then I be first mic. Hired on the spot and easily one of the best employees we ever had. He should have said it's Mooseg with a Sean Connery accent. Here's one that sort of blew me away, because it's so simple. Post most of the interview. When we've turned to "do you have any questions for us?" the guy said, really matter of fact and not at all obsequiously, "Well, I'd like to know if there's anything that we've talked about that has left you with doubts about me, so I can be sure you've got the information you need when you're considering my fit. It was so simple, but so freaking honest and effective because it was phrased as, I want to help you be thorough, but also quite self-serving because it got out in front of those doubts. We were immediately amazed that no one asks this. I'm never going to not ask it again, not that I'm looking, in case my boss has a line to the NSA. Whoa, this is what this thread is for. I was hiring for a graphic design position and had a number of resumes on my desk. One guy had actually reached out to me personally through our website, and I just told him to email his resume to our job inbox. We had just moved to a new office, and I posted a photo one morning to our Facebook page showing the new view off to our fans. That afternoon, he showed up at our office in a suit and tie, asked for the job, killed the interview and got it. He figured out the general area we were in from the photo, called the various office buildings to ask ahead, found us, and just showed up. 2 years later, he's still there and doing an absolutely fantastic job. On a technical interview for computer stuff, me, if you come across a problem you've never seen before, how to approach it, soon to be new employee, I'd Google it. This is the best answer. Most people go crying to vendors or support contracts before doing a simple Google search, and I find that offensive. On the way to the conference room for the interview, interviewee instinctively picked up a gum wrapper off the floor and threw it in the nearest trash can. I just caught this peripherally, and he made no effort to show off his insignificant good act. Honestly, I have never hired a single person on an impulse or based on something clever they said did in an interview. It's about qualifications and overall leaving a good impression. Trash Boy did get hired, and his simple act was really representative of him being pleasant and thoughtful. He also had several years experience in field. I've been hiring for years. I do pick up on little things. Sometimes a gum wrapper can distinguish one candidate from the others. Unfortunately, his good deed earned him the nickname Trash Boy. We were hiring for a specific position and had arranged a number of interviews for it from pre-screened applicants. As we had to play with real people's real schedules, we ended up with the strongest candidate, UC Berkeley PhD, going first. He did very well in the interview and it was kind of a given that we'd hire him. This left us in an awkward spot with one very interesting interview of someone completely without a degree. However, there were budget restrictions, so this was a long shot. Meanwhile, inside the company we had a fairly complex technical problem going on. Instead of just having a hi-bye interview with this other guy, we threw our complex problem at him about 24h before the interview. The sucker solved it before the interview, and did it really quite brilliantly. At that point I was willing to go to the ropes to get him. My boss asked me to logically deduce the number of teachers in our country. I work with statistics, so that was a viable question. I got very close to the actual number. Half a year later he told me that this was the kicker to hire me. When I walked into the shop and went up to the counter to ask for the boss I had an interview with, this girl started laughing at me. I asked why and she said, "You just walked in here like you owned the place." It became a running joke between her and the real owner manager. I've interviewed a lot of people who have been downsized or lost their jobs to offshoring, and a lot of them rip apart their old employer in the interview. Some like to rip on their old manager. The ones who keep it classy about their past employers get my attention. It's a forecast of how well they deal with change and look for opportunities instead of complaining. You'd be surprised how few people do this. When I worked at KFC, I interviewed a guy that had just been fired from McDonald's. He told me how he fricked up, said he had just had a kid, and was kicked out of his house. The fact that he was completely honest with me was impressive. He promised he would not make the same mistake working for me. I took a chance on him, and he wound up being one of the best employees I ever had. I had the same experience fresh out of jail. I laid it out on the line, told her I screwed up. She appreciated my honesty and hired me on the spot. Best interview I've ever had, actually. Not an employer, but I was on the other side of this a few years back while interviewing for a job in retail. I was asked why they should hire me and I replied, "I will work all shift long. I will show up on time, and if I'm late or can't make it for some reason, I'll call you ahead of time with a real reason." Holy crap, I can't tell you the look of relief on this manager's face when I said that. Was working a landscape job. Guy shows up and starts painting fences. Got to talking at break time. Later I asked for his business card. Card had his name, phone and the words "I will show up." That's it. He explained that's all he needs to do to have plenty of business. Show up as promised. Not an employer, but I still think it fits. Last week I was going through my final interview with a company and had a series of interviews scheduled with a few people. My second to last interview was with an hour person. Afterwards, she directed me back to the lobby, thinking I was her final interview. Once I was in the lobby, I figured out that she made a mistake, but I could not go back by myself due to security. So I took out the business cards I had received so far and started calling people, politely letting them know that I had accidentally found my way to the lobby and asked if they could help me get to my final interview. I guess they did that on purpose. My last interview was a room full of all the people I had just talked to previously. I guess they wanted to see how I reacted under a situation where I needed to hunt people down to get the job done or something, and they were impressed with my initiative. They said most people just flat out leave and hope for the best, and the ones who don't end up taking 15-20 minutes to call. I got an offer on the spot since I immediately called people to get the job done. It felt good. This is how I received one job. I was applying for a job managing backups on a large-scale computer system I'd never used before. I was asked how I would handle a situation where I discovered that the backups could not finish one night. He wanted my approach, knowing I could not answer technically. I answered I'd attempt to do what was necessary to minimize the impact on customer service the next morning. Oh, this was the 90s, and you could still sometimes get jobs on systems you'd never worked on before and they'd give you training. Now they want years of experience on everything. Recently lost an offer because I only had experience on 17 of the 18 systems they desired. Someone else had all 18. I asked her how she would go about a specific task. She said I don't know how, but I'm confident I could Google it and learn quickly. Amazing how many people don't do that. My buddy was asked that in a job interview. Google was his answer. They were not impressed. He did not get the job. It was a job working for the state. Maybe Bing should have been his answer. I showed up to an interview for a construction engineering position with a large general contractor in construction boots and generally dirty, surrounded by guys with suits. I think they thought I was some sort of idiot. Interviewer took a look at me and thought I wasn't taking the interview seriously. I see it took you 6 years to get your degree in mechanical engineering. Why is that? I replied. Because sir, I worked my masonry job all of the way through college. What do you know about our company? I replied. Well, you're currently running the job over there at the nursing home site. Interviewer said, how do you know that? I replied. I'm working there, and I'm currently on my lunch break. Hired the very next day. I graduated right at the time of the dot-com bubble burst. Nothing will flood the field with engineers like that. I currently work with a guy who lost $6 million because of it. I also notice people who are well beyond retirement age, and it must be very difficult for a new graduate to be in the process. I feel really bad for most of you having to endure this process. I was just in the right place at the right time with the right experience to land the job that I wanted. Hiring for a programmer position and I decide to just Google his name. Turns out he also owns a Darth Vader outfit and puts it on to go visit sick kids in the hospital. I hired him so fast it would make your head spin. That is karma. A guy designed and built his own tiny handmade working USB device circuit boards, about the size of a US dime, and soldered the parts onto it. He showed me the boards and explained how he created them using a clothes iron, and he was a software guy. I had an interview where the guy accidentally told me it was in Baltimore. I live in Philadelphia. I went down there, showed up at the corporate office, and found out he was in a satellite office only about a mile from my apartment. I rushed back up there just in time for the interview. He hired me for my effort and to pay me back for gas. You showed up to your Baltimore interview really early, it seems. Boss, can you pass a drug test? Me. Yeah, boss, well, we don't have anyone else here named Photoknet, so I guess you're hired. That's how a 5-year span at a grocery store started for me. I hired someone for giving me a dirty look in an interview. Allow me to preface this by saying I really despise the interview process. I find that a person's resume generally tells me everything I need to know, and for me the interview is merely a formality to ensure the applicant doesn't have any personality or hygiene issues. That said, I was hiring a desktop tech. I had a really stupid question that went something like, if I give you this and this piece of information, would you be able to connect a PC to our domain? The correct answer was yes. 3 applicants stammered and stuttered and said they figured they could but might need a little practice. The 4th applicant looked at me like I was insane but answered in the affirmative with no hesitation. I hired her on the spot. The point of the interview is to ensure they actually know the stuff they have on their resume. Of course, I work in programming, where a good half of the resumes I get are a collection of skills thrown together by a recruiter. When I applied for an internship at a local production house, I had to wait in the lobby area for a short time. I picked up a magazine and started reading. When it came interview time, I was asked about a subject I had literally just read about for the first time in the magazine I was reading in the lobby. My interviewer was impressed that I knew so much about the topic and asked how I knew all of that. I smiled and told the truth. My interviewer started laughing her head off. I got the internship and turned it into a job for 2 years. I was interviewing a larger, trashy looking lady. I asked a question, "What's your proudest achievement?" She teared up a bit and responded, "When my daughter told me that even though I'm still overweight, she was just happy that I wasn't on crack anymore." Honesty is the best policy, folks. My dad had a job interview. He was the first person to be interviewed out of 400. It was only a maintenance man job at condo, but it was in a fancy city, Las Olas. My dad wore a suit and tie. The first comment the interviewer made was, "Wow, overdressed," and even though my dad didn't expect praise for dressing nice, he didn't expect a comment like that either. After the interview, the guy was like, "Okay, I'll call you back by Thursday." Yet, the next day my dad got a phone call saying, "You know what? I'm not interviewing all these other people. I interviewed 3 others and they didn't make a good impression like you did. I'm not gonna interview anyone else. You got the job." What was amazing is that I was on the phone with my dad when he said he was getting a call on the other line. Not being savvy with phones, he tried to switch the call when he accidentally made it a 3-way call. I heard everything his now boss said about getting the job. I was so happy for my dad. It was actually a 4-way call. The Nsa is always listening. My ex-husband had been looking for a job for about 3 months when he walked into a Serve Pro. He asked if they were hiring, was told no, at which point he yells, "Why isn't anyone hiring? I just want to fricking work." The owner stuck his head out of one of the offices and said, "You're hired." He worked there for 3 years. My first spur of the moment job application was on a napkin, and one of my qualities I listed was not fundamentally retarded. 5 years later, I was doing a working interview in the same field, and when I asked how I was doing, my future chef told me, "Well, at least you're not fundamentally retarded." Apologies for the ableist language. That's just how I got my career started. Reminds me of my first spur of the moment application. It was in a bar. I was drunk. Very drunk. The interviewers were not. I got the job. Guy showed up at the wrong location for his interview, but they called and said he was dressed up and that they were sending him our way. The applicant then called approximately 30 minutes before his interview to cancel because he wasn't able to locate our office. It was the kid's first job, which we knew through his application, and he was still responsible enough to make the call to us rather than just not showing up. His interview went decent given that he was a nervous wreck, and he's currently one of the best employees we have. Demonstrating responsibility goes a long way. A few tricks that I've been told led me to getting jobs I had interviewed for. 1. While waiting to be called in, read a book in the waiting room, rather than play with your phone or pick up a magazine that they provide. 2. Be confident. You wouldn't have been granted an interview if you weren't actually being considered for the job. So be confident that you have the skills required. 3. Ask questions. Your resume will already give the impression that you are perfectly qualified. Asking questions will show that you are engaged and interested in the position, and that you want a better understanding as to whether or not the position is the right fit for you. 4. Some people have difficulty talking about what they are good at. Instead, Talk about some of the projects you've worked on. Your eyes will light up and you will speak with passion. It shows. 5. Be friendly, polite, courteous to everyone. Smile. 6. Some of my favorite questions for low to mid-level jobs. From your experience, what makes the difference between a good employee and an amazing employee? This project you are working on sounds really interesting. Where can I read more on this subject on my own? Not me, but my friend was wanting to hire a secretary for his office, and during an interview the phone rang. So he told her, why don't you take that one so we can see your phone skills? She agreed and answered the phone. The person on the other end was asking about the job opening, and the girl straight out told her, no, I am sorry, but I have already filled that occupancy. My friend was flabbergasted and hired her right there on the spot. She is still his secretary and she is doing awesome 5 years later. And now they are living happily in a dominant submissive relationship in a quaint house in the suburbs. I got a lot of work from an employment agency in the late 90s. I am a junior college dropout, was working as a house painter and a massage therapist at the time. It was during the rainy season when work was lean that I visited the local employment agency to pick up odd jobs until work picked up. I was doing some labourer work for them when I needed to drop by the office for some reason. I showed up to the office located in a strip mall. I noticed that someone had hit the front door with a raw egg probably the night before as it had congealed on the glass. I had cleaning materials in my truck, so I offered to clean the dried on egg off of the windows, and went ahead and did it anyway. The women who manage the agency, from area VP to office manager to the office supervisor, the person who actually decides who to call, were all in the office at the time. My assignments quickly changed from digging ditches and cleaning out demos to working for a bank. Eventually, I was offered a job in the office itself, and worked for that company for 5 years in 3 different cities and 2 different states. Now, I wouldn't recommend egging the offices where you are applying it the night before, but it wouldn't hurt to carry some paper towels and Windex in your car. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.